Have you noticed how certain lies turn into absolute truths when repeated thousands of times? There is a silent, almost invisible theory that has been planted in the minds of ripe women for decades. A theory as dangerous as seductive that promises security while stealing possibilities. The scariest is not that she exists, but no one question her, as if it were natural to give up who we really are when the biological clock goes beyond a certain mark. Many believe this is the natural order of things. But what if I said that this is precisely the most sophisticated control mechanism ever created? When a woman goes beyond 60, something curious happens around her. Not inside her, but around. The world begins to draw invisible but powerful lines of containment, whispering what is or not allowed to feel, express, desire, or conquer. The society offers a ready-made package, wrapped in tiny expectations and conformism disguised as wisdom. The paradox is disturbing. Precisely when experienced to distinguish the essentials of the superfluous, voices, including internal, suggest that the moment to star in the story itself has passed. This is just the visible surface of an ancestral trap. What no one reveals is that there is a wicked math behind this game. The more you accept this foolish theory, the faster your vital energy is drained. Not by the time it goes, but by disconnecting with your true power. Many women waste this golden phase trying to fit into frames made by small minds, ignoring that true maturity is not about resignation. It is about internal revolution. The most dangerous jails are not constructed with concrete and steel, but with unquestioned beliefs, transmitted as poisonous inheritance from generation to generation. What would happen if you found that the map that gave you to navigate after the 60 is deliberately incomplete? That there are territories of fullness, passion, and purpose that have been carefully omitted? Fools. Theory works precisely this way. Convinces extraordinary women to live ordinary lives, exchanging their more authentic dreams for crumbs of social approval. The real crime is not aging. It is to stop existing while still breathing, accepting a miniaturized version of who you really are. But to recognize the cage, you must first realize your bars. In the next few minutes, I will dismantle, piece by piece, this toxic theory that has sabotaged the rebirth of mature women for decades. I will reveal the 5 invisible mechanisms that turn potential into resignation, and more important, the accurate antidote for each of them. What I will share are not just ideas, they are keys. And what you will do with these keys will determine if the coming years will be lived in the dimension of mere survival or in the vibrant frequency of continuous reinvention. The decision seems obvious, but the way is not. Get ready to question everything they told you about living after the 60s, especially the truths that seem unquestionable. When a society draws invisible lines around mature women, it is not just setting limits. It is practicing a silent theft of possibilities. The first layer of this dangerous theory acts as collective hypnosis. Suggests that after the 60 life is about slowing, collecting, reducing expectations. As if there was a cosmic law determining that mature women should gradually disappear from their own history. This fallacy is so deeply rooted in the collective unconscious that many accept it without question, as if it were natural to replace dreams with memories, creation for contemplation, protagonism with support in alien stories. The danger is not only what this theory does, but what prevents it from happening. When a woman internalizes these devastating limits, something devastating occurs at the neurological level. The brain paths responsible for innovation, courage, and expansion begin to atrophy. Not for biological inevitability, but for lack of use. Neuroplasticity, this extraordinary capacity of the brain to remodel at any age, is dormant under the shadow of obsolete beliefs. Science proves that the mature brain, far from being limited, has a unique capacity for integration between hemispheres that is rarely available in earlier phases of life. A cognitive advantage that remains unexplored when we surrender to imposed labels. The social web that supports this theory is plotted with seemingly harmless language wires. Note the small expressions that permeate everyday conversations. For your age, it's still, despite the years. These linguistic particles carry the subtle poison of age, installing self-depreciation microchips that automatically activates whenever a mature woman dare to overcome invisible borders. The repetition of these expressions is not accidental. It is a social control mechanism that transforms potential into resignation through small daily doses of disqualification. The most disturbing thing is that these external voices are eventually internalized and sound like the very voice of consciousness. The fourth element of this toxic theory is the deliberate confusion between seniority and obsolescence. In a world obsessed with the new, the false equivalence between youth and relevance is created, as if the value of a woman was inversely proportional to her age. This is possibly the most insidious aspect of theory, to convince extraordinary women that their significant contribution time has passed. This lie has devastating consequences, not only individual, but collective. How many works have never been created? How many companies have never been founded? How many revolutionary ideas have never come to light because their creative potentials were convinced that it was too late? The fifth component of this mental trap is the romanticization of nostalgia as a substitute for purpose. There is a subtle pressure for women after the 60s to become curators of the past rather than architects of the future. As if memories were more appropriate than visions, how to remember it was more worthy than creating. This sneaky replacement between purpose and nostalgia is presented as a natural transition, when it is actually an amputation of possibilities. True wisdom is not to abandon the future to live in the past, but to use accumulated experiences as a platform for new flights, no matter how late they start. The anatomy of this theory reveals its second level, the false doctrine of decreasing utility. It is that voice that constantly whispers its value decreases over time, like a commodity with expiration date. This is one of the cruel distortions of reality, as it completely reverses the truth about human development. Maturity is not a process of depreciation. It is an upward curve of integration. The woman after the 60s carries a living library of experiences, a refined emotional intelligence, a unique ability to distinguish the essentials from circumstantial. Ironically, it is precisely when we reach this internal sophistication that society suggests that we move away from significant roles, as if wisdom were an impediment and not a decisive advantage. The myth of technological irrelevance constitutes the third pillar of this theory. The predominant narrative suggests that there is an insurmountable abyss between maturity and digital innovation, as if there was a genetic incompatibility between wrinkles and bytes. This technological determinism completely ignores that the true barrier is not cognitive, but attitudinal. The question is not whether the mature brain can learn new digital languages. It can absolutely, thanks to neuroplasticity. But if we give ourselves permission to inhabit territories allegedly reserved for younger generations. When a woman after her 60s rejects this artificial limitation and plunges into the technological universe, not only dominates new tools, but often brings innovative prospects that escape those who have never lived in an analog world. The trap of aesthetic invisibility is possibly the most visible manifestation of this theory. In a culture obsessed with youth, a perverse paradox is created. The more experience and wisdom a woman accumulates, the less visual space she receives. This distorted mathematics transforms female aging into a gradual process of disappearance. The real problem is not the natural transformations of the body. It is the cultural interpretation of these changes as loss of value. When a woman internalizes this belief, she begins to shrink, not only metaphorically but physically, taking up less space, speaking lower, becoming literally smaller. The revolution begins when we decide that our visual presence in the world is not negotiable, regardless of the marks that time prints on our skin. The fifth dimension of this theory is what I call the spectator syndrome, the subliminal belief that after a certain age, the role of women is to observe life to happen to others, applauding the achievements of others, and dedicating itself exclusively to support the dreams of the next generation. This is a dangerous deviation from the healthy self, century necessary for any significant achievement. Creating, building, and leading requires a legitimate form of selfishness, one who recognizes that its unique purpose in the world does not dissolve with the passage of time. True intergenerational generosity is not abdicating its own projects, but in demonstrating with concrete actions that life can be an upward spiral of intensifying achievements, do not decrease with age. The real danger is that this theory of fools does not present itself as an ideology, comes disguised as conventional wisdom, those truths that everyone knows. Its tentacles slowly infiltrate, first colonizing language, then expectations, and finally self-concept. The woman who previously saw herself as a transformation agent begins to accept the role of passive observer of life. Desire gives way to reminiscence. Audacity is replaced by excessive prudence. Dreams are renovated to fit in smaller and smaller spaces, until the extraordinary seems inappropriate, and the mediocre becomes comfortable. This transformation does not happen overnight. It is slow poisoning, administered in small daily doses of realism and acceptance, until the victim herself becomes a defender of her limitations. The antidote to this poison begins with a seemingly simple but deeply revolutionary act. Questioning. Question not only external expectations, but especially the internalized voices that draw borders around their potential. Where does the belief that your best phase has passed from? Who has defined the limits of what is appropriate for a woman of 60, 70, or 80 years? What evidence supports the idea that creativity, passion, and purpose have expiration date? This questioning is not an abstract philosophical exercise. It is the first step in dismantling a mental structure that blocks possibilities. When we begin to realize how many of our limitations are social constructions and not inevitable realities, we open the first crack in the invisible wall around us. The second stage of this liberation process requires a rigorous exercise of de-identification, separating who we really are from cultural narratives about female aging. This is not an instant process, but a daily practice of discrimination between truth and conditioning. Each time you catch yourself thinking, "This is not for my age," or "I've passed my time," stop and ask, is this voice really mine, or is the echo of external expectations that I have internally? The true identity of a mature woman is not defined by social conventions about age. It is a unique expression of her essence, talents, and purposes that completely transcend any chronology. The goal is not to deny age, but prevent it from becoming an identity prison. The recalibration of the relationship with time represents the third element of this transformation. Fools. Theory promotes a linear and declining view of personal time, as if life were a mountain we climbed into youth only to progressively descend in maturity. This metaphor is as common as devastating. The alternative is to recognize that personal time can function as an upward spiral, where each return not only takes us forward, but also deeper into our unique potential. This reconcension is not mere positive thinking. It is a necessary correction of cultural distortion. The evidence is everywhere. Women who start revolutionary careers after the Caisna, who find new passions to the 70, which contribute significantly to the world to the 80 and beyond. These are no exceptions to the rule. They are manifestations of the true nature of human development when free from the currents of foolish theory. The fourth pillar of this internal revolution is the deliberate practice of renewed protagonism. For decades, many women are socialized to play support roles, to be the wife of, the mother of, the assistant of. Maturity brings the opportunity to claim the center of the narrative itself. This does not mean adopting a selfish stance, but recognizing that you have not only the right, but the responsibility of fully occupying your unique place in the world. This protagonism manifests itself in apparently small, everyday choices, expressing opinions without minimizing prefaces, occupying physical space with conscious presence, making choices based on authentic desires rather than external expectations, refusing to be invisible or diminished by arbitrary conventions about age and gender. Each of these micro-decisions is an act of resistance against foolish theory. Fifth Avenue for liberation is perhaps the most challenging, completely rewriting its relationship with risk and failure. Fools. Theory promotes the pernicious idea that, with the advance of age, we must become progressively more cautious, avoiding risks and protecting the status quo. This supposed wisdom is actually the most direct path to intellectual, emotional, and spiritual atrophy. The inconvenient truth is that growth at any age requires a healthy relationship with failure. The willingness to be temporarily incompetent as one learns, of finding itself vulnerable as it expands, of seeming foolish as it transforms. The woman who embraces this truth after the 60s not only releases her own potential, but becomes a lighthouse for all around her, demonstrating that life can be an expansive adventure until her last moment, especially when we refuse to sacrifice possibilities on the altar of predictability. When we talk about reinvention after the 60s, we are not discussing cosmetics or superficial devices. We are talking about a deep reconnection with the authentic core that has always existed under layers of social adaptation. This is the luminous paradox. The true reinvention is not to become someone else, but finally allow yourself to be who has always been. For decades, many women live edited versions of themselves, adjusted to fit in predetermined spaces, pruned not to disturb, diluted not to intimidate. Liberation from foolish theory offers the extraordinary opportunity of an expression without filters, when the need for external approval decreases in the same proportion that internal clarity increases. This is not an instant process, but a journey of self-compliance that can be the most rewarding adventure of mature life. The relationship with the body perhaps represents the most intense battlefield against foolish theory. The predominant narrative suggests that the mature female body must progressively disappear, become invisible, covered, contained, embarrassed. This expectation of process is one of the most cruel forms of symbolic violence against women. The revolution begins when we recognize that our body is not a traitor who failed to stay young, but a faithful companion who carried us through decades of experiences. Each brand, each line, each transformation tells a fully lived life story. True liberation is not to deny physical changes. It is in rejecting the cultural interpretation of these changes as a decrease in value. The mature body is no less, it is different, and in this difference lies a unique beauty that does not seek to imitate youth, but to express its own temporal magnificence. The third territory to be complained is that of pleasure without apologies. Fools. Theory sustains the insidious belief that intensity, passion, and delight are unique privileges of youth. This lie is particularly devastating because amputes possibilities of deep joy just when we have more sophistication to appreciate them. The truth is that the mature nervous system, educated by decades of experiences, is capable of nuances of inaccessible pleasure to youth. Whether in sensuality, aesthetic appreciation, deep intellectual connection, or simple daily pleasures, the ability to feel does not decrease with age. It often expands when released from internalized social judgment. Complaining your right to full pleasure is not frivolous or secondary. It is a fundamental act of self-evaluation that reconnect body, mind, and spirit in an integrated experience of being alive. The fourth aspect of this liberation involves radically transforming the relationship with finitude. The theory of fools uses the fear of death as an instrument of control, suggesting that the proximity of the end justifies a gradual withdrawal from life. This wicked reversal causes many women to start dying, in small daily doses of self-restart, long before necessary. The revolutionary alternative is to allow the consciousness of finitude to function not as an invitation, but as a catalyst to live more fully every available moment. When we truly internalize that our time is limited, each hour becomes too precious to be wasted in accordance with arbitrary expectations. Finitude, when consciously embraced, does not paralyze, galvanizes, does not decrease, intensifies. This recalibration completely transforms the experience of aging, converting it with passive decline into an active distillation process, where each moment carries an existential density progressively higher. The fifth element of this transformation is the reconstruction of its relationship with the legacy. Fool's theory promotes a close view of contribution, as if leaving a significant mark in the world was the exclusive privilege of earlier phases of life. This artificial limitation often leads mature women to dramatically underestimate their present and future impact potential. The truth is that some of the deepest contributions arise precisely in the intersection between accumulated experience and freedom of social expectations, an increasingly accessible space as we get older. Its legacy is not something frozen in the past. It is a work in continuous evolution. The question is not, what brand have I left? But But what unique brand can I leave now, from this singular point of perspective that no one else has? This reorientation paves the way for contributions that would be impossible at any earlier stage of life, precisely because they require wisdom, courage, and detachment that only decades of experience can provide. If you have arrived here, you probably feel something moving internally, a kind of deep recognition, as if a sleeping truth within you was being awakened. This is not just another inspirational content. It is a call for a complete reassessment of possibilities. The next step of this journey requires an honest inventory. What dreams did you silence to believe it was too late? Which expression territories have you abandoned for considering inappropriate for your age? What legitimate desires have been replaced by social expectations about how a mature woman should behave? This inventory is not a lamentation exercise, but an accurate mapping of everything that can be claimed. The postponed dreams rarely disappear, only submerge in the deep layers of consciousness, waiting for the right time to resurface. What if this moment is now? The practical application of this revolution requires more than consciousness, demands a deliberate restructuring of the environment that surrounds you. The theory of fools is not sustained in vacuum, is constantly reinforced by certain relationships, cultural consumption, and daily habits. Examine critically. Who in your immediate circle unconsciously reinforces age-based limitations? What content do you consume that normalize the invisibility of mature women? Which daily routines reflect compliance with decreased expectations rather than continuous expansion of possibilities? Genuine transformation requires that you become consciously selective surrounding people who see their potential without age filters, consuming content that expands rather than restricting their view of possibilities, and establishing routines that honor their continuous evolution rather than their supposed decline. There is a frequently neglected element in this process of liberation: the revolutionary power of conscious discomfort. Fool's theory offers a false promise of comfort through compliance. If you accept to decrease, you will not face rejection or ridicule. This exchange, authenticity for social acceptance, seems tempting when the fear of judgment intensifies. However, true growth at any age occurs precisely at the edges of the comfort zone, in that unknown territory where we temporarily feel awkward, incompetent, or vulnerable. The woman who breaks free after the 60 develops a consciously friendly relationship with this transforming discomfort, recognizing it not as a sign of error, but as an irrefutable evidence of expansion. Wisdom is not in avoiding growth discomfort, but in developing the ability to remain centered while crossing it. The role of strategic alliances in this journey cannot be underestimated. The revolution against foolish theory is simultaneously personal and collective, requires both internal work and significant external connections. This does not mean isolating with people exclusively of their age, on the contrary. True revitalization often comes from deliberately diverse circles in generational terms, where ideas are exchanged without age-based hierarchies, where your experience is valued without you being reduced to it. This authentic intergenerationality, where you are simultaneously mentor and apprentice, offering wisdom while remaining radically open to new perspectives, creates a social ecosystem that naturally dissolves the arbitrary limitations of foolish theory. In exactly 10 years, you will look at this present moment as a crucial bifurcation point in your trajectory. This is not just another passively consumed content. It is an existential crossroads. In front of you, two distinct paths open. Continue accepting the progressive limitations imposed by foolish theory, allowing each year to diminish you a little more, or declare an immediate internal revolution, refusing to waste an additional day in concessions to arbitrary expectations about what a woman of her age should be or do. I know which way it seems safer. I also know which way leads to fullness. The choice before you could not be more consequential. And it needs to be done not only once, but every day, in every small decision on how you will take up your space in the world. We have come to a crucial moment on this journey, where knowledge needs to become concrete action. I clearly see the extraordinary potential that exists in you, not despite your age, but precisely because of it. However, I also understand that dismantling decades of conditioning requires more than momentary inspiration, requires specific tools, a consistent support and guidance community. Therefore, I created the Renaissance Without Limits program, a complete system developed specifically for women above the 60 who are ready to completely rewrite the rules of the game. This is not just another motivational course. It is a process of structured transformation, combining advanced science on neuroplasticity with practical strategies to dismantle each component of foolish theory. For 8 weeks, you will receive not only transformative content, but specific tools for reprogramming limiting mental patterns, recalibrate your relationship with possibilities, and creating a personalized plan for the next 5 years that completely honor who you really are, not who the world expects you to be. More importantly, you will do this alongside an extraordinary women community on the same journey, creating connections that go far beyond the program. If you realize that something deep is moving inside you during this conversation, you felt that visceral recognition of truths you always knew but may have forgotten, this program was specifically created for you. Registration is open for another 5 days, and vacancies are limited to ensure individualized follow-up. For more details and secure your place, now visit the link in the description of this video or leave your best email in the comments with the word reborn. Do not allow one more day to be lived by the diminished version of who you really are. His true life, the one that completely honors his essence, is waiting on the other side of this decision. What I shared today was not just information, it was an invitation to a complete reimagination of possibilities. The theory of fools prospered for so long precisely because it was never named, never exposed to the clear light of consciousness. Once revealed, she loses her invisible power. Once articulated, it becomes no longer an inevitable truth, but just a story. A story you now have the power to completely rewrite. Perhaps you are feeling a mixture of emotions right now. Recognition, indignation for lost time, and something deeper emerging in the most authentic layers of your being. Hope. Not that superficial hope of those who escape reality, but that substantial hope that is born when we finally see the truth without distortions. Age has never been her problem. Her cultural interpretation is that it was. His body was never his enemy. His social reading is that it was. His ability to feel, create, and contribute never diminished. It was only progressively silenced by external and internal voices that confused convention with truth. What happens from here depends entirely on you. This revelation can only be an interesting moment of clarity that will soon be swallowed by the inertia of the old standards. Or it may be the beginning of a personal revolution that completely redefines as you live in the coming years. Decades, perhaps. The difference is not in the information I shared, but in the decision you will make in the coming days. Will you continue adjusting to fit in smaller and smaller spaces? Or will it begin to claim increasingly broad territories of authentic expression? Will the external look continue to define its value, or will establish new terms for your relationship with the world? As you contemplate these questions, I leave you a truth that I have repeatedly observed. Women who completely reject the theory of fools not only transform their own lives, they change the field of possibilities to all around you. When you refuse to diminish to fit in arbitrary expectations, you silently grant permission to do the same. When you fully occupy your space without excuses, you make visible a path that others can follow. Your personal liberation is never just personal. It is an act of service to generations that came before you, and those who will come later. It is a living statement that another way of aging is possible. A form that honors, expands, and celebrates the extraordinary journey of being a woman in its fullness. If something inside you was touched, if a sleeping truth has been awakened, don't let this feeling dissipate without concrete action. Turn this moment of clarity into a tangible turn point. Begin today to dismantle the invisible borders that were designed around their potential. Reject the diminished version of who you are. Claim territories of expression that were falsely declared inappropriate for their age. And most importantly, connect with other women who are on the same revolutionary journey. True transformation rarely happens in isolation. It blooms in the community, mutual recognition, shared validation of new possibilities. If this content has resonated deeply with you, please leave your comment below by sharing which aspect of foolish theory has impacted you to recognize. Your perspective not only enriches this conversation, it can be exactly the catalyst another woman needs to start her own release journey. Like this video so that other women can also find it, And subscribe to the channel to continue this essential conversation about completely redefining what it means to flourish after the 60. Share with that friend that you know you need to hear this message now. Revolution against foolish theory is not only individual. It is a collective movement of women complaining about their innate right to an expansive, vibrant, and significant life, no matter the number of turns they have taken around the sun.